I'm Cassie Adams, 41, a Rear Admiral in the U.S. Navy who's spent over 2 decades leading operations in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. For years, I was also my sister's safety net, bailing her out, paying her bills, and cleaning up messes without a second thought. But when she stood up at my own wedding reception, called me a deadbeat, and mocked my service in front of 200 guests, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been humiliated by someone you've sacrificed everything for? Share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand tall after being disrespected, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, respect, and reclaiming your worth. What happened next, you won't see coming. I never thought my sister would be the one to teach me that some betrayals cut deeper than enemy fire. But then again, I never thought I'd have 200 Navy SEALs march into my wedding reception either. Life has a way of surprising you, even when you've spent 23 years in the military thinking you've seen everything. My name is Cassie Adams, and until 3 months ago, I believed family loyalty was sacred. I'm a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy, though most people just see a woman in her 40s who happens to wear a uniform to work. What they don't see is the path that got me here, the deployments, the sleepless nights coordinating operations, the weight of decisions that affect thousands of lives. What they especially don't see is how many times I put my sister Gemma's needs before my own career advancement. Gemma is 2 years younger than me, and from the time we were children, I was her protector. When she forgot her homework, I'd slip her mine during lunch. When she crashed Dad's car at 17, I took the blame and the grounding that came with it. When she dropped out of college junior year to find herself, I quietly paid off her student loans so she wouldn't graduate with debt she couldn't handle. These weren't grand gestures, they were just what you do for family. The pattern continued into our adult lives. Gemma would call me from whatever city she was living in that month, usually around 2 in the morning my time, crying about some crisis. A boyfriend who turned out to be married. A job that didn't work out. Rent she couldn't make. I'd wire money or make calls or simply listen for hours while she talked through her problems. Then she'd disappear for months, only to resurface when the next crisis hit. I never minded. That's what older sisters do, right? You show up. You fix what you can. You love unconditionally. During my deployment to the Persian Gulf in 2018, Gemma got engaged to a man she'd been dating for 6 weeks. She called me via satellite phone while I was coordinating a rescue mission for stranded civilians, sobbing because her fiancé wanted a big wedding, but she had no money. Without thinking twice, I promised to cover the costs when I returned stateside. That engagement lasted exactly 4 months, but I never asked for the money back. When I made Admiral 2 years ago, Gemma was the first person I called. She listened as I described the ceremony, the weight of the new responsibilities, the pride I felt representing every woman who'd fought to break through the military's glass ceiling. Her response was lukewarm at best. "That's great, Kat," she said, but I could hear her scrolling through her phone while we talked. "I'm sure it's a really big deal in your world." Your world. As if military service existed in some separate universe from real life. I should have paid attention to the shift in her tone, but I was too caught up in my own excitement. Besides, Gemma had always been a little self-absorbed. It wasn't malicious, just her way of processing things. The changes became more noticeable during family gatherings. At Christmas dinner last year, when our parents asked about my latest assignment overseeing naval intelligence operations in the Pacific, Gemma interrupted with a story about her new yoga instructor. When I mentioned the commendation I'd received for restructuring our cybersecurity protocols, she rolled her eyes and said, "Kat's always been such an overachiever." She'd started hanging around with a crowd of social media influencers and wannabe entrepreneurs in Los Angeles, people who measured success by Instagram followers and brand partnerships. In their world, military service was either something to be pitted, "Oh, you poor thing, you had to join the military," or dismissed as a government handout. Gemma began absorbing their perspectives like a sponge. During my engagement party 6 months ago, she made a joke about how I was finally ready to settle down like a normal person. The guests laughed, but there was an edge to her comment that made my jaw tighten. I let it slide. Wedding planning was stressful for everyone. But the comments kept coming. Small digs about my regimented lifestyle. Jokes about military wives being professional dependents. Questions about what I'd do in the real world after I retired. Each comment felt like a paper cut, minor on its own, but they were starting to add up. 2 months before my wedding, Gemma asked if she could bring a +1 to the reception. Of course, I said. Who is it? This guy Derek I've been seeing. He's got this amazing startup idea. He's developing an app that connects pet owners with pet influencers. It's going to be huge. I bit back my first 3 responses and settled on, that sounds interesting. He's actually looking for investors, she continued. I know you probably have some money saved up from all those years of free military housing and food. Free housing and food. As if combat pay and hazard duty compensation were government welfare instead of earned benefits for serving my country in dangerous situations. Gemma, I'm not really in a position to invest in startups right now, I said carefully. The wedding expenses, and Michael and I are looking at houses, right, of course. You're probably not the investor type anyway. Derek says military people don't really understand business. There it was. The summary of everything I'd become in her eyes, a person who lived off government handouts and couldn't understand the real world of entrepreneurship and innovation. I ended the call politely, but something had crystallized in my mind. My sister didn't just misunderstand my career, she actively diminished it. Everything I'd accomplished, every sacrifice I'd made for my country, every time I'd put my life on the line to protect American interests abroad, had been reduced to a steady paycheck from Uncle Sam. The week before the wedding, Gemma called with another crisis. Derek had been evicted from his apartment, and could he stay with her for a while? Of course, her lease didn't allow long-term guests, and her landlord was being totally unreasonable about the situation. I was wondering if you could help with a deposit for a new place, she said. Just like $2,000. I'll pay you back as soon as Derek's app takes off. Gemma, I can't. The wedding costs have maxed out my discretionary spending. Come on, Kat. $2,000 is nothing to you. You don't have kids, you don't have a mortgage, you barely spend money on anything fun. This is really important to me. I almost said yes. The old pattern was so ingrained, Gemma needs help. I provide help, life continues. But something stopped me this time. I'm sorry, I said. I just can't right now. The silence stretched between us for several seconds. Fine, she said finally. I guess I know where I stand with you. She hung up without saying goodbye. 3 days later, I was putting the finishing touches on seating arrangements when my phone buzzed with a text from Gemma, still planning to give a speech at the wedding. Have some really great stories about growing up together. Can't wait to share them with everyone. I stared at that message for a long time, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. Gemma had never asked to give a speech. We hadn't even discussed speeches beyond the maid of honor's traditional toast from my college roommate Sarah. But something about the tone of that text, the forced cheerfulness, the emphasis on really great stories sent warning signals through my brain. Military training teaches you to trust your instincts about threats. The message felt like a threat. I tried calling her back, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted asking what stories she planned to share. No response. I called our mother to see if Gemma had mentioned anything about a speech. Mom was surprised. She'd assumed only Sarah would be speaking. 2 days before the wedding, Gemma finally returned my call. Oh, don't worry about the speech, she said breezily. It's just some funny memories from when we were kids. Everyone loves a good sibling story at weddings. What kind of memories? You know, just how you were always so serious and responsible, and I was the fun one. How you never really learned to relax and enjoy life. Stuff like that. My chest tightened. Gemma, I'd prefer if you didn't give a speech. Sarah's handling the maid of honor toast, and we want to keep things simple. Kat, come on. I'm your sister. I've known you longer than anyone. People expect me to say something. No, they don't. And I'm asking you not to. Another long pause. Fine, she said. Whatever you want. It's your day. But she didn't sound like someone who'd actually agreed to my request. She sounded like someone who'd decided to do whatever she wanted regardless of what I said. I spent the next 48 hours trying to shake the feeling that my own sister was planning to sabotage my wedding. Every time I thought about confronting her directly, I talked myself out of it. Family drama was the last thing Michael and I needed right before our wedding day. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the stress of wedding planning was making me paranoid. Maybe Gemma would remember that she loved me and act accordingly. I should have known better. In 23 years of military service, I'd learned that hoping for the best while failing to prepare for the worst is how good people get hurt. But somehow, when it came to my sister, I kept making the same mistake over and over again. I kept believing that family loyalty ran both ways. The morning of my wedding, I woke up at 0500 hours out of habit, even though I had nowhere to be until noon. Michael was staying at his brother's place, following tradition, so I had the house to myself. I made coffee, sat in my kitchen still wearing my navy-issued PT shorts and t-shirt, and looked at my phone. No messages from Gemma. No last-minute apologies or clarifications about the speech situation. Just silence, which somehow felt more ominous than any threat she could have made explicitly. For hours later, I was getting married to the love of my life, surrounded by friends and family who'd traveled from across the country to celebrate with us. Everything should have been perfect. And it would have been, if I hadn't spent 23 years teaching my little sister that she could count on me to absorb any damage she wanted to inflict. Some lessons I was about to learn are taught in both directions. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Michael looked handsome in his navy dress blues. He's a lieutenant commander in the JAG Corps, which is how we met 3 years ago during a legal review of intelligence protocols. The weather cooperated, the flowers were perfect, and our vows brought tears to several people's eyes, including my own. Gemma behaved herself during the ceremony. She smiled at the right moments, applauded when appropriate, and even seemed genuinely happy for us during the receiving line. I started to think I'd been wrong about her intentions. I should have remembered that the ceremony is just the warm-up. The real test of family dynamics always happens at the reception. But for a few hours, standing at the altar promising to love and honor the man I'd chosen to spend my life with, I felt nothing but hope. The future stretched ahead of us, full of possibility and partnership. I was a woman at the peak of her career, marrying her best friend, surrounded by people who understood the value of service and sacrifice. It never occurred to me that my own sister didn't belong in that category. During cocktail hour, Gemma was charming and sociable, working the room like a professional hostess. She complimented the bridesmaids' dresses, made small talk with my Navy colleagues, and even seemed to hit it off with Michael's parents. Several people commented on how lovely she looked, how funny she was, how lucky I was to have such a vivacious sister. "She's got such a great energy," said Commander Patricia Walsh, my former XO. "Very different from you, but in a good way." I should have heard the warning in that observation, but I was too busy feeling relieved that Gemma was behaving normally. Maybe I really had been overthinking the whole situation. Maybe my sister was going to remember that she loved me after all. The reception started smoothly. Dinner was served without incident, the band was excellent, and Michael and I managed our first dance without either of us tripping. Sarah gave a beautiful maid of honor speech that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure. She talked about our friendship through college and beyond, about how proud she was of my military service, about how perfect Michael was for me. "Cassie has spent her entire adult life serving others," Sarah said, raising her champagne glass. "First her country, then her friends and family, and now Michael. She's the most selfless person I know, and she deserves all the happiness in the world." The applause was warm and genuine. I felt surrounded by love and respect. This was what I'd wanted, a celebration of the life Michael and I were building together, witnessed by the people who mattered most to us. Then Gemma stood up. She hadn't been on the list to speak. She hadn't asked permission. She simply rose from her seat at the family table, picked up a microphone that had been left on the head table, and began talking. "I guess it's my turn," she said with a laugh. "I mean, I am the sister." The room quieted politely. Gemma was poised and confident, smiling broadly as she looked around at the assembled guests. She was wearing a stunning emerald green dress that complemented her blonde hair perfectly. She looked like exactly what she was, a beautiful, charming woman who knew how to command attention. "I've known Cassie my whole life," she began, "and I have to say, she's always been exactly the same person. Serious, responsible, completely predictable. Some people might call that boring, but I prefer to think of it as reliable." A few people chuckled. The comment skirted the edge of appropriate, but it wasn't quite an insult. Yet, growing up, Kat was always the one with the plan. She had her whole life mapped out by the time she was 16, military academy, Navy career, probably die at her desk with a stack of paperwork in front of her. Very admirable, in its own way. More nervous laughter. I could feel the room's energy shifting slightly. This wasn't the warm, celebratory tone people expected from a sister's wedding speech. "The thing about my sister," Gemma continued, "is that she's never really learned how to live in the real world. I mean, she's been living off the government since she was 18 years old. Free housing, free food, guaranteed paycheck, full benefits, early retirement. It's basically the ultimate safety net." My blood turned to ice water. The room went very quiet. "Don't get me wrong," Gemma said with another bright smile, "there's nothing wrong with being a total deadbeat if that works for you. Some people are just more comfortable when someone else is taking care of all the hard decisions." Deadbeat. She'd called me a deadbeat at my own wedding, in front of 200 guests, while I sat frozen in my chair wearing a white wedding dress and a smile that suddenly felt painted on. The silence in the room was deafening. Nobody was laughing now. People were looking at each other, at me, at Gemma, unsure whether this was some kind of joke they weren't getting. Gemma, oblivious to the horror she'd just unleashed, kept talking. "But hey, that's what makes us such a good team, right? I'm out here in the real world, taking risks, building businesses, actually contributing to the economy. And Kat's got her nice, safe, government job where she can't get fired and doesn't have to worry about making a profit or dealing with competition. It's like we balance each other out." Every word was a knife between my ribs. She was describing my military service, my deployments to war zones, my responsibility for intelligence operations that kept Americans safe, my leadership of thousands of sailors and Marines, as if it were welfare fraud. Michael reached over and took my hand under the table. His grip was tight, supportive, but I could feel his anger radiating through his fingers. Around us, my military colleagues sat in stunned silence. These were people who understood what service meant, who'd risked their lives alongside me in operations Gemma would never hear about because they were classified at levels she couldn't imagine. And they'd just heard my sister call me a deadbeat who'd never lived in the real world. So anyway, Gemma concluded brightly, "Congratulations to the happy couple. May you always have someone else paying the bills." She raised her champagne glass in a toast, apparently expecting applause. Instead, she got the kind of silence that follows explosions. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my face composed in what I hoped was a neutral expression. Years of military discipline had taught me not to react in the moment, not to let emotions override strategic thinking. But inside, something fundamental had broken. This was my sister. The person I'd protected and supported and loved unconditionally for 41 years. The person I'd sacrificed for repeatedly, without question, without keeping score. The person who'd just stood up at my wedding reception and told 200 guests that I was a lazy parasite living off taxpayer money. Michael leaned over and whispered, "Do you want me to handle this?" I shook my head slightly. Military training was kicking in now, overriding the personal hurt with tactical thinking. Gemma had just declared war in the most public venue possible. The question was how to respond in a way that would achieve the desired strategic outcome. Shouting would make me look unstable. Crying would make me look weak. Storming out would make me look guilty. But doing nothing would make me look defeated. I excused myself quietly from the head table and walked toward the restroom, moving with the kind of calm, measured pace that comes from years of commanding ships in crisis situations. Behind me, I could hear the awkward murmur of conversation resuming, people trying to process what they'd just witnessed. In the bathroom mirror, I looked exactly like what I was, a woman whose sister had just publicly humiliated her at her own wedding. My face was pale, my eyes were bright with unshed tears, and my hands were shaking slightly. But I was still a rear admiral in the United States Navy. And admirals don't surrender without a fight. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Commander Jake Morrison, Colorado of Naval Special Warfare Group 2. We'd served together in Afghanistan, and he owed me a favor from an operation that had gone sideways 3 years ago. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Admiral Adams? What's up? Jake, I need a favor. Are any of your SEAL teams in the Norfolk area right now? Yeah, we've got Team 8 finishing up a training exercise at Little Creek. Why? I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. How would you feel about making a dramatic entrance at a wedding reception? I gave him the address and the timeline. Jake didn't ask many questions. He learned to trust my judgment during our deployment, when my intelligence work had kept his teams alive during several high-risk missions. We'll be there in 30 minutes, he said. Full dress blues. Full dress blues. And Jake? Make it memorable. When I returned to the reception, Gemma was holding court at the bar, surrounded by her LA friends and apparently oblivious to the fact that half the room was staring at her with barely concealed disgust. She was laughing about something, gesturing with her champagne glass, completely comfortable with the chaos she'd just created. Michael stood up when I reached our table. Everything okay? He asked quietly. It will be, I said. I spent the next 25 minutes making polite conversation with our guests, accepting their awkward condolences about Gemma's speech, and watching the clock. Several of my Navy colleagues approached me privately to express their outrage on my behalf. That was completely out of line, said Captain Rodriguez from Naval Intelligence. I can't believe she'd say something like that. Family dynamics can be complicated, I replied neutrally. But inside, I was counting down the minutes until my sister learned exactly who she'd chosen to mess with. At exactly 9:47 p.m., the double doors at the back of the reception hall swung open with a bang that echoed through the room like a gunshot. 200 Navy SEALs in full-dress blue uniforms marched through those doors in perfect formation, their movements synchronized with military precision that made the entire room fall silent in awe. They filled the reception hall like a tide, their footsteps echoing in unison against the marble floor. Every head in the room turned toward the spectacle, conversation stopping mid-sentence as people tried to process what they were seeing. The formation moved with the kind of disciplined coordination that takes years to perfect, each SEAL maintaining perfect spacing and timing as they arranged themselves in precise rows facing the head table. The effect was breathtaking, like watching a piece of military choreography performed by the most elite warriors in the world. Commander Morrison stepped forward from the front rank, his uniform immaculate, his bearing commanding enough to make every civilian in the room straighten their shoulders unconsciously. He approached our table with measured steps, stopped exactly 3 feet away from my chair, and snapped to attention with a precision that made my heart swell with pride. Rear Admiral Cassie Adams, he said in a voice that carried clearly through the silent room, on behalf of the United States Navy SEALs, it is our honor to salute your service and leadership. Then he rendered the sharpest, most perfect salute I'd ever seen, holding it while 200 of America's most elite warriors followed suit in perfect unison. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. I rose from my chair and returned their salute with equal precision, my voice steady and clear as I addressed Commander Morrison. The honor is mine, Commander. Thank you for your service to our nation. The SEALs held their salute for exactly 10 seconds, long enough for every person in that room to understand exactly what they were witnessing. Then Morrison dropped his hand, and the entire formation followed suit with mechanical precision. Admiral, Morrison continued, we wanted to personally thank you for your leadership during Operation Neptune Shield. Your intelligence coordination saved American lives and completed our mission successfully. Operation Neptune Shield. A classified anti-terrorism operation in the Persian Gulf that Gemma would never hear about in any detail, but which had resulted in the capture of a high-value target and the prevention of an attack on American naval assets. Outstanding work by outstanding warriors, I replied. The success belonged to your teams. The exchange was professional, respectful, and completely authentic. These men had served under my operational command. They were here because they respected me as a leader and as a warrior. The applause started slowly, a single pair of hands from somewhere in the room, then another, then a building wave of sound that filled the reception hall with genuine admiration and respect. I looked across the room toward the bar, where Gemma stood frozen with her champagne glass halfway to her lips, her face pale with shock and what looked like dawning horror. For the first time in my life, my little sister was seeing me as other people saw me. Not as a boring older sibling with a government job, but as a leader who'd earned the respect of some of the most elite warriors in the world. Commander Morrison stepped back and nodded to his formation. SEALs, attention. 200 men snapped to attention in perfect unison. Honor guard, present arms. The front rank of SEALs drew their ceremonial swords in a synchronized movement that gleamed under the reception hall lights. The blades caught the light like silver lightning, creating a visual spectacle that left several guests audibly gasping. For service above and beyond, Morrison announced, for leadership under fire, and for dedication to protecting American lives and interests around the world, we salute Rear Admiral Cassie Adams. The sword salute lasted exactly 15 seconds. Then the blades were sheathed with the same synchronized precision, and the formation began to file out of the reception hall in reverse order, their footsteps echoing in perfect rhythm against the marble floor. As they passed our table, each SEAL nodded respectfully in my direction. Several stopped briefly to shake Michael's hand and congratulate him on marrying one of the finest officers in the Navy. The entire display lasted exactly 8 minutes from start to finish. When the last SEAL disappeared through the double doors, the reception hall erupted in applause that lasted for nearly 3 full minutes. I remained standing throughout the ovation, accepting the congratulations and handshakes from guests who were now seeing me in an entirely different light. Military colleagues who'd served with me weren't surprised by the SEALs' tribute. They understood what it meant to earn that level of respect from elite warriors. But the civilian guests, including Gemma's LA friends, were clearly stunned by what they'd just witnessed. "Holy shit," I heard one of them whisper to another. "She's like, actually a really big deal." Gemma had disappeared from the bar area. I spotted her near the back of the room, standing alone with her back against the wall, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. She looked like someone who'd just realized she'd been playing chess with a grandmaster while thinking she was playing checkers. Michael squeezed my hand as the applause finally died down. "That was incredible," he said quietly. How did you? "I made a phone call," I said simply. The rest of the reception was a completely different event from the one Gemma had tried to sabotage with her speech. Guests who'd been avoiding eye contact with me after her "deadbeat" comment were now lining up to shake my hand and express their respect for my service. Several people apologized for not understanding the significance of my career before witnessing the SEALs' tribute. Others asked thoughtful questions about military service and what it meant to command operations in combat zones. Gemma remained at the back of the room for the rest of the evening, nursing the same glass of champagne and looking like she wished she could disappear entirely. She left before the reception ended, slipping out without saying goodbye to me or Michael or our parents. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a deep, settled sense of finality. 23 years of unconditional loyalty to someone who saw me as a deadbeat living off government handouts. 23 years of believing that family meant supporting each other regardless of cost. 23 years of being wrong about who my sister really was. But 8 minutes was all it took for 200 Navy SEALs to show a room full of people who I really was. Sometimes the truth doesn't need explanation. Sometimes it just needs the right moment to reveal itself. And sometimes your little sister needs to learn that the woman she's been taking for granted isn't someone she can afford to underestimate. The lesson was taught. Whether Gemma would learn from it remained to be seen. But I was done being her teacher. From now on, she could figure out life's lessons on her own. 3 days after the wedding, while Michael and I were on our honeymoon in Tuscany, Gemma called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again 6 hours later. Another voicemail. By the end of our first day in Florence, she'd left 7 messages. I didn't listen to any of them. Michael and I spent a week exploring Italian hill towns, touring vineyards, and talking about our future together. We discussed duty stations, career timelines, and the possibility of children. We made love in a centuries-old villa and ate breakfast on terraces overlooking olive groves. It was exactly the peaceful, romantic honeymoon we'd both needed. Gemma's name didn't come up once. When we returned to Norfolk, there were 14 more voicemails from my sister, plus a series of increasingly desperate text messages. I deleted them all without reading past the first few words of each one. My mother called 2 days after we got home. "Cassie, Gemma is beside herself. She says she's been trying to reach you since the wedding, and you won't return her calls." "That's correct. Honey, I don't know what happened between you two, but she's your sister. Whatever it was, I'm sure you can work it out." I took a deep breath. My mother had always been a peacemaker, someone who believed that family disagreements should be smoothed over quickly for the sake of harmony. She hadn't heard Gemma's speech. She'd been in the bathroom during that particular moment, so she didn't understand why I was suddenly unwilling to take my sister's calls. "Mom, Gemma called me a deadbeat at my own wedding reception. In front of 200 guests. She said I've never lived in the real world and that I'm basically a welfare recipient living off government handouts." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "She said what?" "She gave an impromptu speech about how I'm a lazy parasite who's never contributed anything meaningful to society. She called military service a safety net for people who can't handle real jobs." "Cassie, that can't be right. Gemma wouldn't say something like that. Ask anyone who was there, Mom. Ask Michael. Ask Sarah. Ask any of the 200 people who heard it." Another long silence. "I had no idea," my mother said finally. "I'm so sorry, honey. That's completely unacceptable." Yes, it was. And until Gemma understands why it was unacceptable and makes a genuine effort to repair the damage she caused, I don't have anything to say to her. But she's been calling constantly. She's crying every time we talk. She says she doesn't understand why you're so angry. Then she's lying to you, Mom, because what she said was crystal clear. There's no possible way to misinterpret calling someone a deadbeat. I could hear my mother struggling with this new information. Gemma had always been her baby, the one who needed protecting and understanding. I was the strong one, the one who could handle anything, the one who didn't need emotional support. "What can I do to help fix this?" she asked finally. "Nothing. This is between Gemma and me. If she wants to repair our relationship, she knows how to reach me. But I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen for the sake of family peace." 2 weeks later, Gemma showed up at my house. I was in my home office, catching up on intelligence reports, when the doorbell rang. Michael was at the base, so I answered it myself. Gemma stood on my front porch looking smaller than I remembered, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual designer clothes. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wasn't wearing makeup. She looked like the younger sister I'd grown up with, instead of the LA socialite she'd become. "Hi," she said quietly. "Can we talk?" I didn't invite her in immediately. We stood there looking at each other for several seconds while I decided how I wanted to handle this conversation. "What do you want to say?" I asked. "I want to apologize for what I said at your wedding. It was completely out of line." "Yes, it was. I was hurt that you wouldn't help Derek and me with the apartment deposit, and I was drinking, and I said things I didn't mean." I studied her face carefully. Gemma had always been good at apologies that sounded sincere, but didn't actually take responsibility for the underlying problem. "What specifically are you apologizing for?" "For embarrassing you at your wedding. For saying those things about your career." "What things, Gemma?" She shifted uncomfortably. "You know, the stuff about the military being a safety net. I want you to say it. I want you to repeat what you called me." Her face flushed red. "Kat, come on. Do I have to?" "Yes. You have to. If you're apologizing for something, you should be able to say what you're apologizing for." Gemma stared at the ground for a long moment. "I called you a deadbeat," she said finally. "And I said you'd never lived in the real world. And I implied that military service isn't a real job." "You didn't imply it, Gemma. You said it directly. You said I've been living off the government since I was 18, and that I don't contribute to the economy like you do." Tears started running down her cheeks. "I know. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Why were you wrong? Because you serve your country. You risk your life to protect people. What you do is important. It sounded like something she'd rehearsed, but there was genuine emotion behind the words. Gemma wasn't a sociopath. She was capable of remorse when she really understood the impact of her actions. How do you think our military colleagues felt when they heard you call me a deadbeat? I asked. Probably pretty angry. How do you think Michael felt? Horrible. I know I ruined your wedding day. You didn't ruin it, Gemma. But you certainly tried to. She was crying harder now, and I felt a familiar tug of sympathy. This was the pattern we'd always followed. Gemma would hurt me, then cry until I forgave her, then we'd go back to normal until the next time. But I wasn't ready to go back to normal. Not yet. Come inside, I said finally. We sat in my living room, Gemma on the couch and me in the chair across from her. She looked around at the military commendations on my walls, the photos of me with various commanding officers and foreign dignitaries, the bookshelf full of strategic studies and intelligence analysis. I never really understood what you do, she said quietly. No, you didn't. And you never bothered to ask. I know. I guess I was jealous. Of what? Of how accomplished you are. How respected. How put together. I felt like such a failure compared to you. This was closer to honesty than Gemma usually managed, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook yet. So your response was to tear me down publicly? I thought if I could make you look bad, maybe I'd feel better about myself. How did that work out for you? Gemma laughed bitterly. Well, considering that 200 Navy SEALs showed up to prove how wrong I was, not great. Those men served under my command in combat zones, Gemma. They came to honor someone who'd earned their respect through years of hard work and sacrifice. They didn't come to embarrass you. They came because they believe I'm worth honoring. I know. I get it now. I really do. Do you? Because this isn't the first time you've dismissed my career. It's just the first time you did it publicly. Gemma was quiet for a long moment. You're right. I've always thought of the military as, I don't know, something people do when they can't figure out what else to do with their lives. And now? Now I realize I was completely ignorant. And ungrateful. You've been protecting me my whole life, and I never even thanked you for it. I leaned back in my chair, studying my sister's face. The tears seemed genuine, and for the first time in years, she was looking directly at me instead of checking her phone or glancing around the room. Gemma, I need you to understand something. What you said at my wedding wasn't just hurtful, it was fundamentally wrong. I don't live off government handouts. I earn my pay through service that most people couldn't handle. I've been shot at, I've made life and death decisions for thousands of people, and I've sacrificed personal relationships and opportunities to serve my country. When you called me a deadbeat, you weren't just insulting me, you were insulting every person who's ever worn a uniform. I know that now. Do you? Because knowing it intellectually and truly understanding it are different things. Gemma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What do you need me to do? It was a fair question, and one I'd been thinking about since the wedding. What did I need from her to rebuild our relationship? First, I need you to stop taking my help for granted. For 23 years, I've been your safety net. Every crisis, every financial emergency, every time you needed someone to bail you out, I was there. But it was always one way. You took my support as if you were entitled to it, without ever acknowledging the sacrifice it represented. You're right. Second, I need you to respect what I do. You don't have to understand military strategy or intelligence operations, but you need to stop treating my career like it's less legitimate than whatever you're doing. I will. And third, I need you to understand that our relationship going forward is going to be different. I'm not going to be available for every crisis. I'm not going to solve your problems for you. I'm married now, and my priorities have shifted. Gemma nodded slowly. I understand. I hope you do, because this is your one chance to get it right. If you disrespect me or my service again, if you take my support for granted again, if you treat me like your personal ATM again, we're done. Permanently. The conversation lasted another hour. Gemma asked questions about my career that she'd never bothered to ask before. She wanted to know about deployments, about the responsibilities that came with being an admiral, about what it meant to command operations in hostile territory. Some of her questions were surprisingly insightful. Others revealed just how little she'd understood about my life for the past 2 decades. "When you were deployed in Afghanistan," she said at one point, "were you actually in danger?" "Every day." "I never knew that. I thought officers stayed safe behind desks." "Some do." "I didn't." "Why not?" "Because effective intelligence requires understanding the operational environment firsthand. You can't coordinate missions from thousands of miles away without losing crucial context." "But you could have been killed." "Yes. And you never told me. You never asked." That seemed to hit her harder than anything else I'd said. The realization that she'd spent years oblivious to risks I was taking, sacrifices I was making, achievements I was earning, all because she'd never cared enough to ask. When Gemma left that afternoon, we hugged for the first time since before the wedding. It felt different, less automatic, more intentional. Like the beginning of something new rather than the continuation of something old. "I love you, Kat," she said as she got into her car. "I'm sorry it took me so long to show it properly." "I love you too," I replied. "But love isn't enough anymore. I need respect too." Over the following months, Gemma made a genuine effort to rebuild our relationship on different terms. She got a job, an actual job with steady hours and a predictable paycheck, working for a marketing firm in Los Angeles. She broke up with Derek when his app idea predictably failed, and he started pressuring her to ask me for investment money. She called me once a week, but the conversations were different now. Instead of crisis management sessions, we talked about books we'd read, places we'd traveled, goals we were working toward. She asked about Michael's career and my latest assignments. She remembered important dates and sent cards for holidays. Most importantly, she stopped asking for money. When her car broke down in October, she handled it herself. When she needed to move apartments in December, she hired movers with her own savings. When she decided to go back to school to finish her degree, she researched financial aid options instead of assuming I'd cover the tuition. The changes weren't perfect or immediate. Old patterns don't disappear overnight, and Gemma still had moments where she slipped back into her old assumptions about our relationship. But she caught herself now. When she started to complain about not being able to afford a vacation to Hawaii, she stopped mid-sentence and said, "Actually, never mind. I need to figure out my own budget instead of expecting you to solve this." In February, she sent me a card for my birthday that included a handwritten note. "Thank you for all the years you took care of me before I was mature enough to appreciate it. I'm working on being someone worthy of having you as a sister." It was the first time in our adult lives that Gemma had thanked me for anything without being prompted. Michael and I were transferred to San Diego in March, a promotion that came with command of a Pacific Fleet Intelligence Division. Gemma flew out to help us house hunt, paying for her own flight and hotel room without being asked. "This is beautiful," she said as we toured a house in Coronado with an ocean view. "You've really built an amazing life." "We're building it together," I corrected, squeezing Michael's hand. "I know. That's what I mean. You found someone who appreciates what you do, who supports your career, who sees you the way you deserve to be seen." It was a small comment, but it represented a fundamental shift in how Gemma understood my choices. Instead of seeing my military career as something that had prevented me from having a real life, she was beginning to understand that it was the foundation of the life I'd chosen to build. That evening, as we sat on the beach watching the sunset, Gemma brought up the wedding for the first time since our conversation in Norfolk. "I still think about that night sometimes," she said. "About how wrong I was and how perfectly those seals proved it." "It wasn't about proving you wrong," I said. "It was about honoring something you'd tried to diminish." "I know. But the timing was pretty incredible. Like the universe decided to give you back up right when you needed it most." I called them, Gemma. "They didn't just show up." She turned to look at me with surprise. "You called them?" "After your speech, yes. I called Commander Morrison and asked for a favor." "So you planned the whole thing?" "I planned a response to your attack. That's what military training teaches you. When someone declares war, you respond with overwhelming force." Gemma was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. You could have just yelled at me, she said finally. Yelling would have made me look unstable. What I did made me look powerful. It did. Everyone in that room understood exactly who you were after that. Everyone except you already knew who I was, Gemma. The seal's tribute wasn't a revelation, it was a confirmation. She nodded slowly. I was the only person in that room who didn't understand what I was looking at. Yes, that's pretty humbling. It should be. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching waves roll onto the beach. The conversation felt different from the ones we'd had when we were younger, more honest, less performative. Gemma wasn't trying to charm or manipulate me. She was just talking to her sister. Can I ask you something? She said eventually. Of course. Why did you keep helping me for so many years? Even when I was clearly taking advantage. I considered the question carefully. It was something I'd wondered about myself during the months since the wedding. Because I thought that's what family meant, I said finally. Unconditional support, no matter what. I thought if I loved you enough, consistently enough, you'd eventually start loving me back the same way. But I did love you. No, Gemma. You loved what I could do for you. You loved having a sister who would solve your problems and pay your bills and clean up your mistakes. But you didn't love me enough to respect me, or to consider my needs, or to appreciate the sacrifices I was making. That's a hard thing to hear. It's a hard thing to say. But it's true. How do I show you that I love you the right way now? You're already doing it. You're building your own life instead of depending on me to subsidize yours. You're treating my career with respect instead of dismissing it. You're being a sister instead of a dependent. Is it enough? To fix what I broke? I thought about that question for a long time. The damage Gemma had done wasn't just about one speech at one wedding. It was about years of taking me for granted, years of one-sided sacrifice, years of feeling like my love and support didn't matter enough to be reciprocated. It's a start, I said finally. But rebuilding trust takes time. You can't erase 20 years of pattern with 6 months of better behavior. I know. I'm willing to put in the time. Good. Because I'm not going back to the way things were before. I wouldn't want you to. That conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. For the first time since we were children, I felt like Gemma and I were relating to each other as equals instead of as caretaker and dependent. 6 months later, Gemma was promoted to account manager at her marketing firm. She called to tell me the news, excited and proud in a way I hadn't heard from her since high school. They said I have a real talent for client relations, she said. And the pay raise means I can finally start paying you back. Paying me back for what? For all the money you've given me over the years. I've been keeping track, and I think it's somewhere around $30,000. I was quiet for a moment, surprised by the offer. In all our years of financial emergencies and bailouts, Gemma had never even acknowledged that the money represented a loan rather than a gift. Gemma, you don't owe me money. Yes, I do. I took advantage of your generosity for years. The least I can do is pay you back now that I'm finally in a position to do it. I don't want your money. If you want to pay me back, keep being the sister you've become over the past year. Are you sure? I'm sure. But the fact that you offered means more to me than you probably realize. A year after the wedding, Michael and I hosted Thanksgiving dinner for both our families. Gemma flew in from Los Angeles, bringing a homemade dessert and a bottle of wine that cost more than she probably should have spent. I wanted to contribute something special, she said when I teased her about the expensive wine. This is the first family gathering where I'm not asking you for anything. The observation was accurate and oddly touching. For the first time in decades, Gemma was attending a family event as a full participant rather than someone who needed help or support or crisis management. During dinner, when Michael's father asked about my latest assignment, Gemma jumped in with detailed questions about Pacific Fleet operations and intelligence coordination. She'd obviously done research beforehand, wanting to be able to participate in the conversation instead of sitting silently while others discussed my career. Cassie's work is fascinating, she told my father-in-law. I had no idea how complex naval intelligence operations were until I started really learning about them. It was a small moment, but it represented something huge, Gemma actively supporting and promoting my career instead of dismissing it. After dinner, while we were cleaning up, Gemma pulled me aside. I have something for you, she said, handing me a small wrapped box. Inside was a silver bracelet engraved with the Navy motto, Non sibi sed patri, not for self, but for country. I know it's not much, Gemma said, but I wanted you to have something that acknowledged what your service means. To the country and to me. I put the bracelet on immediately, and I've worn it every day since. Thank you, I said, meaning it completely. Thank you, she replied, for not giving up on me, even when I probably deserved it. 2 years later, Gemma met someone, a teacher named David who worked with at-risk kids in inner-city Los Angeles. He was nothing like the men she'd dated before. No grand entrepreneurial schemes, no get-rich-quick plans, no expectation that someone else would fund his dreams. Just a good man doing meaningful work, earning a modest living, and building a life based on service rather than self-promotion. He reminds me of you, actually, Gemma said when she first told me about him. He's got that same sense of purpose, that same commitment to something bigger than himself. They were married 18 months later in a small ceremony in Santa Barbara. Gemma planned and paid for the entire wedding herself, asking for my advice, but not my financial support. During her maid of honor speech, she talked about how David had taught her the difference between wanting someone who would take care of her and wanting someone she could build a life with. My sister Cassie has always been my example of what strength and integrity look like, she said, raising her glass toward me. It just took me way too long to be smart enough to follow that example. The applause was warm and genuine. Looking around the room at the faces of Gemma's friends and colleagues, I could see respect and affection rather than the superficial charm-seeking I'd observed at her old LA gatherings. These were people who knew the real Gemma, not the version who'd tried to build herself up by tearing others down, but the woman who'd learned to find her own strength and use it to support the people she loved. After the ceremony, David's father approached me at the reception. Gemma talks about you constantly, he said. She's so proud of her sister, the Admiral. I'm proud of her too, I said, and meant it completely. She said you taught her what real strength looks like. She taught herself. I just stopped enabling the alternative. The conversation might have ended there, but he continued. She also said you showed her that sometimes love means setting boundaries instead of just saying yes to everything. That observation stayed with me long after the reception ended. It captured something essential about what had changed between Gemma and me, not just her behavior, but my willingness to demand the kind of relationship I deserved instead of accepting whatever she was willing to offer. 3 months ago, Gemma called with news that would have triggered a familiar pattern in our old relationship. David and I are thinking about buying a house, she said. We found this perfect place, but it needs some work, and the down payment is stretching our budget pretty thin. In the past, this would have been her way of asking for money without actually asking. I would have offered to help, she would have accepted gratefully, and the cycle of financial dependency would have continued. Instead, she said, I'm calling because I wanted to ask your advice about home improvements. You and Michael have renovated 2 places now, and I thought you might have some tips about what to prioritize. We spent an hour talking about contractors and timelines and budget management. Gemma took notes, asked thoughtful questions, and never once hinted that she needed financial assistance. Thanks, Kat, she said when we were finishing up. It's so nice to have a sister I can turn to for advice. It's nice to have a sister who asks for advice instead of just expecting me to solve her problems. That's not who I am anymore. I know. That's why I like talking to you now. It was a small exchange, but it represented the culmination of 3 years of rebuilding our relationship on entirely different terms. Gemma had learned to value my expertise and guidance more than my bank account. I had learned to offer support without sacrificing my own needs or boundaries. Last month, Michael and I attended Gemma and David's first anniversary party. The celebration was modest, dinner at their house with close friends and family, but it felt substantial in a way that Gemma's previous relationships never had. During the evening, one of David's colleagues mentioned that Gemma had been volunteering with his after-school program, helping kids with college application essays and scholarship research. She's got a real gift for it, he said. The kids connect with her because she's honest about her own struggles. She doesn't pretend life is easy, she just shows them that it's possible to learn and grow and build something better. Hearing that Gemma was using her own experiences to help other people make better choices felt like the final confirmation that she'd genuinely changed. She wasn't just behaving better toward me, she'd fundamentally shifted how she approached relationships and responsibility. As we were leaving that night, Gemma walked us to the car. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It means everything to have you here." I wouldn't have missed it. "I know our relationship isn't the same as it used to be," she said. "But I think it's better now. Much better. I'm sorry it took a public humiliation for me to figure out how to be a good sister." I considered her words carefully. The wedding had been a turning point, but it hadn't been the real catalyst for change. The real catalyst had been my decision to stop accepting behavior that didn't meet my standards. "The wedding was just when you learned there would be consequences," I said. "The real change happened when you decided to do the work instead of just expecting me to keep forgiving you. Either way, I'm grateful for the second chance." "So am I." As we drove home, Michael asked what I was thinking about. "How different everything is now," I said. 3 years ago, Gemma saw me as someone who owed her support regardless of how she treated me. Now she sees me as someone whose respect she has to earn. "Do you miss the old relationship at all?" I thought about that question seriously. There had been something comfortable about the old dynamic, even if it was unhealthy. Being needed, being indispensable, being the one person Gemma could always count on, it had given me a sense of purpose and importance that was hard to replace. Sometimes I admit it. But I don't miss feeling taken for granted. And I don't miss wondering if she actually loved me or just loved what I could do for her. And now you know? Now I know. She loves me enough to work for our relationship instead of just expecting it to exist on her terms. This morning, I received a text from Gemma with a photo of her latest volunteer project, a scholarship application she'd helped a teenager complete for admission to the Naval Academy. "Told him his essay needed to show the same kind of leadership you've always modeled," the message said. "Hope that's okay." I smiled and texted back, "More than okay. Proud of you." It was a small exchange, but it captured something essential about who we'd become to each other. Gemma was no longer competing with my achievements or dismissing them. She was using them as inspiration for helping other people build better lives. And I was no longer sacrificing myself to maintain her approval. I was offering support and encouragement to someone who'd earned both through genuine effort and change. The woman who called me a deadbeat at my own wedding reception was gone. In her place was a sister I was genuinely proud to know, someone who'd learned to build her own strength instead of undermining mine. It had taken 200 Navy SEALs marching into a reception hall to teach Gemma who I really was. But it had taken 3 years of consistent boundaries and earned respect to teach us both who we could be to each other. Some lessons are worth the wait. Some relationships are worth rebuilding from the ground up. And sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to accept anything less than their best effort. Gemma finally learned to give me hers. And I learned that love without respect isn't really love at all. It's just habit dressed up in family loyalty. The real love came later, built on mutual appreciation and earned trust. It was smaller than what we'd had before, but it was also stronger. Less dramatic, but more durable. And when Gemma calls now, I always answer. Because I know she's calling her sister, not her safety net. That makes all the difference. That night proved something I wish I'd learned years earlier. Respect is earned, even in family. I'm glad my sister eventually understood, but I'll never forget the moment those SEALs walked in. What about you? Have you ever had someone try to humiliate you in front of others? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments, hit that like button if you believe in standing your ground, and subscribe for more true stories about turning disrespect into a defining moment.